Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Little Rock, where love is our teaching and service is our prayer. I'm Lisa Brentz. I lead our membership team, and I'm very happy that you are all here this morning. If you are a newcomer, we're glad you have chosen to join us for worship. While you're here, please stop by our guest table to fill out a guest card and pick up some information about our church. After service, we invite you to join us in the Meadow Wing for coffee hour. So I now invite this morning's illuminator, Amber Triplett, to come forward to light the chalice and lead us in our affirmation of covenant, which you can find printed in your order of service.
I light this chalice with these words. Open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Open our minds to learn what is true. Open our hearts to learn to love one another. Please join me in the affirmation of covenant, saying, Love is the doctrine of this church. The truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
It is always risky for a historian to comment on recent events, because by definition one can't have historical perspective on them. Documents that could provide a rounded view haven't yet been collected and made available, so the information needed for historical perspective is lacking. And besides, you've lived through these events and so are invested in your biases about them. When John D'Amelio spoke of an over-reliance on coming out, his audiences would have understood it as a comment on the tragedy of Harvey Milk's murder. Milk famously encouraged gay people to come out, and he modeled being openly gay for our whole society. And then he was shot. Now, the San Francisco airport has a terminal named for him. But back when D'Amelio delivered those words, it just felt like the same police violence that had inspired resistance at the Stonewall Inn still held back progress for gay liberation, keeping the movement locked in place. I think his thesis that capitalism made gay identities possible is deliciously subversive. But I also think the relationship between the two is probably more nuanced than he makes out. He was right about the movement not knowing its history. Until the 1990s, most popular gay history was about famous historical figures, Oscar Wilde, Walt Whitman, various ancient Greeks. Martin Duberman's books, Hidden from History, Reclaiming the Gay and Lesbian Past, and Stonewall were published in 1989 and 1993, respectively. Jonathan Katz's The Invention of Heterosexuality followed in 1995, and John Boswell's earlier books, exploring medieval Christian tolerance and accommodation for homosexuality, remained highly controversial. Back then, many in my generation were unaware even of the homophile movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Over the last 30 years or so, a great deal of historical research has yielded a rich tapestry of social, political, and intellectual history of international and cross-cultural scope. There are now several books that narrate a continuous history of homosexual minorities in Europe and North America from the invention of a vocabulary about them in the mid-19th century up to recent times. Others explore how various sexual nonconformities were understood and articulated before that vocabulary developed. And a great deal of fiction exploring such themes and characters has been reclaimed, republished, and studied. It's worth remembering how recent all this is. I lived half my life without it. Most of us know that the tradition of holding Pride celebrations in June began as a commemoration of the 1969 revolt against police harassment at the Stonewall Inn in New York. Behind Stonewall lay 20 years of activism and organizing in communities across the country. In New York, an organized action 3 years before at a nearby bar set the stage for Stonewall. A plaque was placed at the site in 2016. This is what it says about the Julius Bar Sip-In. On April 21st, 1966, members of the Mattachine Society, a pioneering gay rights organization, challenged a regulation that prohibited bars from serving LGBT people by staging a sip-in at Julius's, a bar with a large gay clientele. With reporters and photographers in tow, the activists announced that they were homosexuals, asked to be served, and were refused. This early gay rights action and the attendant publicity helped to raise awareness of widespread anti-LGBTQ discrimination and harassment. Now, the photograph on the cover of your order of service appeared in the New York Times and the Village Voice. As you see, these activists were dressed in suits and ties, a standard Mattachine Society practice meant to signal that gay people are normal. They were refused service because, according to the New York State Liquor Authority, a bar that served a drink to a known homosexual was a disorderly house. And that could be cause for revoking its liquor license. Julius's bar was under pressure from NYPD to clean up its clientele. The purpose of the sip-in was to raise visibility of this abuse of police and regulatory authority, and ultimately to gain support for changing the policy. A few months later, the New York Commission on Human Rights ruled that serving gay people in a bar wasn't disorderly conduct, it was discrimination. The Liquor Authority revoked the rule, and yet, 3 years later, bar raids were still a thing the police did to pressure bars to clean up. That's why Stonewall happened. There are so many cases like this in the history of this great 250-year-old American democracy. This one happens to be about queer folk. I decided to use it because I noticed that Petaway Square planned to make an early start on Pride Month yesterday, so I thought I'd join them, and then they got rained out and are rescheduling for June after all, so I hope y'all don't mind us starting early. But there are stories like this about every kind of immigrant community and many religious communities and free thinkers and the poor, and you can probably think of some others against whom some powerful interest or other has managed to make law enforcement into a weapon to oppress them. In some way, those interests influence public opinion that the use of force against those people is justified, and they leverage relationships and maybe spread some money around or make some threats, and in short order, such harassment becomes the status quo. In the fall of 1966, around the time that the New York Human Rights Commission called the discrimination in those bars what it was, some students at Columbia University decided to found an organization they would call the Student Homophile League. First, they sought advice from representatives of Columbia and nearby Barnard College, and from religious advisors, and from the two leading gay rights activists of the time, Frank Kameny, the by then nationally known first president of the Mattachine Society of Washington, D.C., and Barbara Giddings, a founder of the New York chapter of the Daughters of Bilitis. With the support of the university chaplain, they got a space to meet in Earl Hall, Columbia's Student Life Center. Before the end of that academic year, they were a recognized student organization at Columbia, but with the stipulation that they could not organize social events. So instead, they sponsored lectures and held rap sessions about homosexuality on dorm floors, and advocated for general social acceptance of homosexual people, with specific emphasis on ending discrimination in the military, a cause for which their advisor Frank Kameny was well known, and in the psychiatric community. They were the first such student group in the country. 2 years after the plaque went up at Julius's bar, the same group that had accomplished that, the New York City LGBT Historic Sites Project, also got Earl Hall listed on the New York State Register of Historic Places and the National Register of Historic Places. The U.S. military officially allowed LGBT folks to serve openly in 2011, nearly half a century after that student group organized. The psychiatric community responded sooner and moved steadily but deliberately. The process to remove homosexuality as a disorder in the field's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual began in 1973, just 4 years after Stonewall, and was finally achieved only 14 years later, in 1987. And of course, all the while, such slow progress was being made during the last 60 years. It was attended by political controversy and outbreaks of violence. The old status quo dies hard. The old status quo can resurrect, as we are seeing today. So what I want to say today about democracy and diversity is this. Sometimes in a democracy, all it takes is a little good strategic organizing to nudge love a little more to the center. Where our civic institutions have been corrupted or manipulated by some abuse or unjust exercise of power, that injustice or corruption has to be called out and, whenever possible, faced down and defeated. These things we know because we have lately been living through them more intensively and extensively than we have in a long time. At the same time, the longer-term processes of reform toward a status quo more centered in love and justice happen through networks of relationship in society. It's where relationships are weak or non-existent that transactional forms of power get a foothold, where strong relationships exist between neighbors and in communities within a society. Relational power can become deeply rooted enough to withstand and defeat some threat to our neighborly solidarity and collective well-being. Let's say some opportunistic strangers want to come in and take control of some land for some project. I don't know, let's suppose it's an AI data center with a business model we might call hit and run capitalism. They don't actually want to be in the data center business, they just want to be a data center's landlord for a while until it gets unprofitable. And let's say they use their transactional power to manipulate democratic institutions to push that project through. I know that sounds outlandish. But if you can imagine such a thing, you can also imagine how such a thing can be resisted by strong networks of relationship. Likewise, strong networks of relationship can work not only reactively, as in that hypothetical case, but also preventively. Strong relationships with those who serve in our civic institutions can help build resilience and a capacity to resist abuses or unjust exercises of power within or against our democratic system. Those systems become accountable rather than having to be held accountable, which is exhausting for the people to have to keep doing all the time. Small human interactions, small ways we find to work together. And be together. These can add up and go a long way in moving society away from a sense of division and toward mutual acceptance and respect. If we want to find a path away from doubt and distrust and division, a path that leads through respect to tolerance and onward to acceptance and appreciation of each other, and ultimately to the shared affirmation and valuing of our human diversity that a healthy democracy needs, then we have to take some steps in the direction of being in relationship with our civic institutions and working together with them on things that are in our mutual interest. It's especially hard these days for many of us to feel enthusiastic about such cooperative civic engagement. We may have mixed feelings or simply be disinclined to engage civic authorities on any level, out of fear or just hard experience. But I do think that if we are going to see our democracy through these difficult times, we must keep our civic connections healthy and keep our relational power vital, strong, and ready to use. In the cause of putting love and justice at the center in our democracy, there will always be occasions when resistance and confrontation are the right and good appropriate response. Good trouble never goes out of fashion. There will always be occasions when a good political fight is called for. And there will never be a time when good relationships and strong civic bonds are not worth the effort. May we take the small steps that we can when we are ready to risk them. And so may we save democracy. So may it be. Amen. Amen.
Yes. Grab a shaker if you want and join us in singing ABC Democracy, friends. We can't do it without you.
Young and old, standing free, choose
free democracy. Free to be me, free to be you. With our own voice, we make our choice. Free to laugh, free to dream. ABC democracy. Let freedom ring, living and dancing. Vote, vote, vote. Grab your hat, grab your coat, take a break when you vote, vote. Live with hope we all believe. IBC democracy, choosing love, living free. ABC democracy, free to be you and me. ABC democracy. Yay!
I'd like to invite Amber Triplett back to extinguish our chalice as we join together in saying our closing words. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. And honor all beings.
And so may you cultivate relational power.